Doctrine of the Calvinists on the relation of grace to freedom and human cooperation. Predestination. The doctrine of the Calvinists respecting original sin, which, according to them, commits fearful ravages on the human mind, without, however, eradicating the faculties of faith and will, extends its influence to the matter in question. They necessarily teach that grace first determines and, consequently, goes before all the truly pious endeavours of man, so that on this subject we meet with a gratifying general uniformity between all the confessions. On account of their milder and sounder view of original sin, the Calvinists are enabled, moreover, to uphold the doctrine of the active cooperation of man with God, and herein they again coincide with the Catholics, but oppose the Lutherans. By this power of cooperation, however, the Calvinists mean not to affirm that it is in the power of man to receive or to reject the action of God. Where divine grace knocks, the door must be opened. It works quite invincibly, and those who enter not into life are never touched by it. Here we immediately come to the doctrine of predestination. By the side of many very shallow and sterile conceptions, there were ever agitated in the bosom of the Catholic Church the most manifold, profound, and speculative theories on divine predestination and its relation to human freedom. To philosophical talent and acuteness, as well as to the imagination, a wide and, according to the favourite turn of speculation in every age, a very enticing field is here opened, which constantly invites the hand of cultivation. The Church, however, has deemed it her duty to set certain limitations to this spirit. For God can be represented in such relations to man as to make the latter entirely disappear, or man again may be conceived in such a position relatively to God as to subvert the notion of the Almighty as the dispenser of grace. According to the first view, God appears acting with a cruel caprice, which cannot be conceived by man. According to the second, so ruled by the caprice of man that he ceases to be who he is and through whom all goodness springs. Accordingly, the Catholic Church alike rejects an overruling of God on the part of man to impart sanctifying and saving grace, and an overruling of man on the part of God to compel the former to become this or that. On the contrary, she teaches, in the former case, as is well known, that divine grace is unmerited. In the latter, that it is offered to all men, their condemnation depending on the free rejection of redeeming aid. The Lutheran formularies emancipated themselves in this respect from the authority of Luther, and in accordance with the Catholics taught, not, indeed as we have before observed, without detriment to the internal consistency of their system, that Christ died for all men, that he calleth all sinners to himself, and earnestly willeth that all men should come to him and receive his proffered aid. It is otherwise with Calvin. He assures us indeed that he will move cautiously between two shoals, one consisting in the temerity of the believer to scrutinize the unfathomable mysteries of God, the second consisting in the studious avoidance of the subject of predestination, speaking of it as a dangerous sandbank. He finds for his own part a great practical interest in this doctrine. The sweet fruits, suavissimus fructus, which he discovered in the dogma of absolute predestination, and which tended to confirm him in his opinion, and thus noted by him. In the first place, men can have no firm and deep conviction of the truth that it is only God's mercy which hath ensured human salvation, unless the believer be assured that not all are destined for happiness, nay, that God grants to one what he refuseth to another. In the second place, ignorance in this respect obscures the glory of God, plucks humility up by the roots, ipsam humilitatis radicem evelit, renders a sense of internal gratitude towards God impossible, and disturbs the quiet of conscience in the pious. For the consciousness that, in respect to sins, no difference exists between him and the reprobate, and that faith alone establishes the difference, comprises a source of the purest consolation. Calvin has left a warning example to those who, from any subjective practical motives, think they are obliged to adopt any new or strange doctrine. An example that shows it to be the exclusive duty of the theologian to seek out with humility what the doctrine of the Church prescribes for the promotion and excitement of religious and moral feelings. Since the truth and objectivity of the Church doctrine imparts likewise to all the practical precepts it sanctions the character of truth and objectivity. For the reasons above stated, that is to say, in order to call forth a deep Christian piety, Calvin lays down the following notion of predestination. We call predestination that eternal decree of God, whereby he hath determined what the fate of every man should be. For not to the same destiny are all created, and for some is allotted eternal life, to others eternal damnation. According as a man is made for one end or for the other, we call him predestined to life or to death. The same idea the Reformer again expresses in the following way. We assert that by an eternal and unchangeable decree, God hath determined whom he shall one day permit to have a share in eternal felicity, and whom he shall doom to destruction. In respect to the elect, this decree is founded in his unmerited mercy, without any regard to human worthiness. But those whom he delivers up to damnation are, by a just and irreprehensible judgment, excluded from all access to eternal life. It is scarcely credible to what truly blasphemous evasions Calvin resorts in order to impart to his doctrine an air of solidity and to secure it against objections. As faith was considered by Calvin a gift of the divine mercy, and yet as he was unable to deny that many are represented in the Gospels to be believers, in whom Christ found no earnestness and no perseverance, and whom consequently he did not recognize to be the elect, Calvin asserts that God intentionally produced within them an apparent faith, that he insinuated himself into the souls of the reprobate in order to render them more inexcusable. Instead of acknowledging in the above stated facts the readiness of the Almighty to confer his grace on all who only wish it, he explains them by the supposition of intentional deceit, which he lays to the charge of the Almighty. Equally strange is the reason assigned for the doctrine of predestination, that God wishes to manifest his mercy towards the elect and his justice towards the condemned, as if the two divine qualities were severed one from the other and were mutually ignorant of each other's existence. God will be at once just and merciful to all without exception, not just merely towards these and merciful only towards those, as the prejudiced judges of this world are wont to be. We must also bear in mind that the notion of justice considered in itself cannot even be upheld if no fault exists. And no fault can be charged on the reprobate if, without possessing the use of freedom, they are condemned, nay, have been condemned from all eternity. Equally baseless would be the notion of mercy, as it has necessarily for its subject sinners, who, by the free determination of their own will, and not by extraneous compulsion, have transgressed the divine moral law, in order then again to receive pardon. For in this case the whole process would be a mere absurd farce. It was, moreover, only by the greatest efforts of Calvin and his disciples, particularly Beza, that this doctrine was enabled to pervert the sound understanding of Christians. Berne especially resisted for a long time till the consensus Tigurinorum was brought about. The Gallic Confession immediately adopted this doctrine, and the Belgic likewise. That the Synod of Dort should sanction Calvin's doctrine of predestination was to be expected. However, other Reformed communities had from their very origin much softened the doctrines of Calvin. Among these we may notice the Articles of the Anglican Church, while the Catechism of the Palatinate maintains silence upon the subject, and the Confession of the Martyrs positively declares against the decree of absolute predestination.